just go through in one lecture how all these steps occur. How spring tillage works. This would be growing a corn crop. How fertilization happens, how planting happens, what kind of cultivation occurs, and then fall tillage. Okay. And then at this point, an early field trip to a farm is really good. Students get to touch the machinery. Here they are in a cab of a combine. They just love getting their hands on the equipment. Okay. Then also, I focus a lot on how farmer practices affect the environment. So my class is sort of farmer focused. It says, you have a farmer's doing something, how does that affect the environment? So we're looking at farmer choices. And then how do the various sort of factors that are present on a farm affect farmer choices? This is human inputs, the physical environment, insect pests, weeds, and diseases. And these all affect what a farmer does on the farm, and then of course, what the farmer does affects the environment. And then of course, there's the other elements of a farming context, which would be the historical factors, like how farming developed, where the farmers came from, did they grow up in a farming family, economic factors, ethical things, etc., etc. And I try to touch on these in my class. And throughout the class, I stress that I want the students themselves to actually define what sustainability is. And this is kind of a, sustainability, everybody says, oh yeah, sustainability means we got to be able to do stuff forever. But when it comes down to it, what does it really mean on a farm? And so I want my students to wrestle with that, and at some point, probably about a third of the way through the class, we have a class period, we have a discussion, and we try to hammer out a definition. In the last class I taught, this was their definition of sustainability that the class agreed upon. So we use this from then on to decide what's sustainable and what isn't, and then we can sort of judge farmer practices, which one is more sustainable, which one is less sustainable, compared, in light of this definition right here. Okay? And I also stress that we can learn a lot from natural ecosystems. So I use these two systems as sort of a foil to talk about ecosystem function and ecosystem characteristics. And throughout my lectures, most of my talk about the science has sort of an ecosystem ecology flavor to it. I'm trained as an ecologist, but also a farmer. So, one end of the spectrum would be this monoculture cornfield. Say 200-acre cornfield where they grow corn on corn every year, and the opposite end of the spectrum would be a tallgrass prairie, right, which is probably the epitome of sustainability in our area. It's been there for thousands of years. And probably a sustainable agroecosystem would probably be somewhere in between these two. Okay. In the class meetings, of course, there's lecture, and I use that for the science background. We have some discussions. When we talk about ethics, we read some Wendell Berry and some other things, and we have discussions about that. This last time I had some student presentations, so each student in the class, there was 12 students in this particular class, and they each gave a presentation, and that allowed me to bring into some other subjects that I don't touch on in the readings or the lectures, and the students get to choose what those presentations are. And then we have farm visits and or invited speakers, and farm visits work real well for some things. Sometimes invited speakers work real well too. When I've had a sustainable ag class that has 30 or 40 students, sometimes having the farmers come into the class is much better than going to the farm. I can control the material. Everybody can hear the farm. There's not wind. Sometimes there's no distractions. And farmers often basically stay with what I ask them to do. Sometimes when I bring in other nonprofit people or other people in the ag sector, they all have an agenda. But farmers are really good, in my experience. And if you choose a farmer that's articulate and has spoken about farming in other public settings, that can be a really good way to. introduce students to farming. Okay, so the science topics that I cover are these right here. And these are the lectures that I give. And sometimes they're, over two class periods. And it's basically, ecosystems ecology, towards agriculture. And we have to remember that these students know nothing about agriculture. The only prerequisite for this class is a single science class. Some of them have taken intro bio, some of them have taken introductory chemistry, whatever. So I have to bring them up to speed on all these things. I want them to get conversant in the material and also understand the main concepts. We use a variety of textbooks, sometimes Gleesman, I tried Vandermeer. Neither of these textbooks work really well, but they work pretty well. And then I have to have other readings that fill in the gaps. We do some sort of historical sustainable ag readings, Berry, etc. Some newer readings, and then I have a smattering of overview articles. And these are articles that are in big journals like Nature or Science or PNAS. And then I have a couple of group projects. And these are some of the topics that I've used for the student presentations. These are hot issues that the students like to talk about. Individual students often care about particular topics so that they get to choose what topic they present. Okay. And I often also have some kind of a small service component to the class. Students like to do a project that's real, that has a real effect on the community. And a few years ago, we actually planned the student farm and came up with recommendations. We talked about local food systems, and we've also taught segments of sort of environmental studies in the elementary school. All right, so we have these two group projects that I think are exciting. The first is where we assess farm sustainability, and the second part is this comparative agroecology component where we actually go to China. And in sustainability assessment, what we do is I ask the students to break up the environment into 4 different axes. And if I have 4 groups, then we're going to come up with 4 different axes, and that'll be a consensus project. And then last term it was soil quality, air quality, and energy use, and they thought that energy use was tied to air quality because of greenhouse gas emissions and CO2, water quality, and then biodiversity in the farm, and then outside the farm. So they broke up the environment, the effects of farming on the environment onto these 4 axes. And then the idea is that we'll do some kind of sustainability polygon, but with only 4 axes. So this is an example using many different axes. And I should point out that our polygon only looks at the environment. It doesn't include economics or cash flow or anything like that. And now we had 12 students. We had these 4 different groups. And I struggled at first, how are the students are going to do this? And luckily, there is actually an assessment structure in the literature. There's a bunch of papers where people have tried to do this. And my rules for this were that the students had to be able to assess a farm with a single visit for 2 hours with either talking to the farmer or looking at the farm. And it had to be, this is going to be anecdotal. We're not going to do this controlled study of 2 different farms or 10 farms chosen very carefully. So we're not going to do any quantitative measurements. We're not going to look at organic matter. We're not going to look at CEC content or anything like that. And these methods need to work on any type of farm anywhere in the world. These are my rules. So I found this structure within the literature that uses ecological indicators. And when I build my website, I'll give a few paper references to that if you want to see those kinds of things. And the students read these papers, they become experts on their particular topic, their axis. And their goal is to create this assessment method for their different axes. And there's probably going to be some subcategories. So if there's 3 students in each group, there could be 3 subcategories in each group has 3 different subspecialists, each working on a component of, say, water quality. One could be pesticides, one could be, I don't know, soil erosion, one could be, something else, okay? And then at the end, each group is going to come up with a final score from 0 to 10 for sustainability on their axis. Okay, so we'll get these 4 scores at the end that has the 4 axes, each with a score from 0 to 10. And that'll be our sustainability estimate, or assessment that'll work on any farm. And in the United States then, we visited 12 farms around campus. We refined this. The students created this observation survey form so that when we went out to a farm, there was questions that had to be asked. Okay, well, I'm not going too fast. So this is a farm we visited in southern Minnesota. This is an organic dairy farmer, and we just went through the whole survey and filled it out. Okay, so that's how the assessment works. So the assessment works with a single farm visit. Then the new part with this course was having a comparative component where we wanted to compare different types of farms using the assessment as data. And it could be anything related to the class, and the comparative questions should use the sustainability assessments. And for my class, it was these 3 questions. How does a farmer's view of sustainability affect their practices? How do farmers' motivations for farming affect the farm's sustainability? And third, what do farmers see as the limits to sustainability? So the class came up with these 3 things. There'll be 4 people in each of these groups, okay, such that each of these groups has a representative from each of the 4 axis groups. This is sort of a jigsaw approach. So that each team has one of the axis specialists to sort of interpret those sustainability results. Okay?
You want to wrap it up in sort of 10:40.
Okay. All right. So anyway, I'll go really fast here. So in this class, there's a fall term class. We have a trimester system, so we have a winter break trip, 2.5 weeks. We go to China. We visit 12 farms there. And then we have a small class, a half credit in winter term. We analyze results. We make presentations. We go to China. We went to 3 different places. Bing, bing, bing. Started in Beijing. Here we are brushing our teeth. Did some farm stays. This is our organic corporate farm in Sichuan province. This is one of our favorite farmers, Mr. Gao. Some of our farms we had to get to by boat. Great food. The local media loved us. Paper. Sometimes there was some hard work. We took some hikes in the mountains. It was a great bonding experience. We really got to know my students. This is one of the posters that they made at the end of the class with the results of one of the studies. Okay, so presentation materials will be at this site. Do we have time for 1 or 2 questions? Or do we have to go?
We did get a late start.
We did have a late start. Any questions? Sorry about the speed of that.
How did you pick your China contacts?
China contacts were serendipitous. One of them was through an NPR story, and I just contacted people. One of them was through somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody at the University of Minnesota who ended up, and the final guy ended up being the Sustainable Ag Extension guy in Sichuan province. One person ended up being a rural sociology graduate student in China who was doing a farm internship on a CSA farm in Minnesota. So she's in Beijing, and she's sort of at the center of the sustainable ag movement in China. And then I've met a bunch of people, and everybody's just so happy. So if you know a few people in China, it's all through contacts. Yes?
I can ask you later, but and if you didn't have the China component to the whole year program, then
Right.
do you think it would be as impactful on these students' lives, or how would it be?
But I think that you still could do this. You could still do sustainability assessments. I mean, you could have a focus in your class. I mean, you could do comparative. You could do some comparative questions still using sustainability assessments, and you could have those questions be whatever you want.
Right.
Right? Does doesn't have to be China. I have an interest in China. China's fascinating for a bunch of different reasons. You know, it has industrial development in China, in agriculture right now. There's all the environmental issues, and, population, and, it has a history in agriculture. But, so there's a lot of really interesting comparisons you can make between Chinese and American agriculture. So I thought it was a great field exercise. Any other quick questions?
If the next presenter wants to go ahead and start up the PowerPoint, if we have any more questions, we can.
Right, and I'll be around if anybody has any questions. I only touched on international ag studies, but it's really exciting. It's a fantastic class. My students loved it. I loved it. I'll do it again next year.